All right, thanks. Bye. Forward, screen share. I don't think I got that right. There we go. All right, if we look on the schedule, what we're doing today is the parasites, and we should finish that today. In fact, we should finish early. I don't think I'll do the review today, although I could do it at 2:30. I'll think about that. Because in the lab we don't have anything going on. All you need to do is work on your unknown work. And the unknown project is due July 21st. That's next week. And then remember, the final will be July 23rd. It'll be an online final, obviously, since the entire class is online. And I wanted to ask, what did you students think of the proposal to bring Yavapai online in the fall semester? Anyone want to share anything? If you go online in the fall, I hope you will be very careful. Let's go ahead and get started if I can find where I got it. Up here it is. All right, so we've now talked about the parasitic protozoans, all of the parasites that I want to cover in the kingdom Protus. And that included the amoeboid protozoans, and there's only one, Entamoeba histolytica, the flagellates, and there were a few, Giardia lamblia, Trypanosoma cruzi, Trypanosoma brucei, Leishmania, and it also included the ciliates, which there was only one, Balantidium coli, and it included the sporozoans, which include the most important parasitic protozoan in the world, and that's malaria, or the Plasmodium species that cause malaria, and Toxoplasma gondii. Okay, any questions about any of that? So today we're going to finish up on the parasitic protozoans, and they are all helminths, so they're all animals. Now please understand the term helminths means worms, and that not all worms are parasitic. In fact, there are actually 3 phyla, is that what they're called, of worms, and the annelids, which are where you can find earthworms, none of them are parasitic. But we are going to talk about the parasitic worms, and they belong to 2 phyla, the platyhelminths, or flatworms, and the nematodes, or the roundworms. And when we compare these helminths, the flatworms and the roundworms, please understand that we call them worms and we call them helminths, but that's because we are humans, and when we look at the nematodes and the flatworms, they are as different from each other as they are different to humans. Is everyone clear on that? So the flatworms and the roundworms are as different from each other as they are different to humans. All right, hopefully you understand that. There are 2 flatworms we need to talk about, and their scientific name for a flatworm is platyhelminth. They're the flukes, and that's the common name. their scientific name is the trematodes. And then the tapeworms. That is also a common name, and the scientific name is the cestodes. Now, all of the trematodes and the cestodes are parasitic, but there are many flatworms, or platyhelminths, which are free-living and not parasitic. Any question about that? All of the trematodes and the cestodes are parasitic, but I'm not sure how many. It's probably the majority of the platyhelminths are free-living and not parasitic. And then of the parasitic nematodes, we're only going to talk about the parasitic ones, but please understand that there are many more nematodes which are free-living, and they are not parasitic. Okay, any question about that? Let's put this on the bottom, and then I can see that a little better. Okay, a free-living species, meaning a worm that's free-living, will be multicellular, and they will have organs and glands and tissues for digesting food, for their nervous system, for the reproductive system, and their circulatory system. But the parasitic worms have less extensive or even lack some of their systems, like the digestive system. And the reason why they don't have a digestive system is they're living in, well, we're talking about the parasites of humans, but they're living in a parasite of another animal, and they're living in the digestive system, the intestines, and so they're relying on their host species to digest the food for them, and they simply absorb the food through their skin. They may have a less extensive nervous system and other systems, like they may not have a system for locomotion. And why they have less extensive or even lack certain systems is because they're relying on their host to supply their needs. Any question about that? Like all of the cestodes, the tapeworms, they do not have a digestive system, and they rely on their host to digest food for them. Some of the worms are monoecious, meaning they have both male and female reproductive organs in the same organism. And another term for monoecious is, you can say, they are hermaphroditic. In a few species, the worms are self-fertile, meaning that a hermaphroditic worm can fertilize itself. In most species, you need two worms to come together simultaneously, and then they fertilize each other. If you've ever seen earthworms breeding, you need two of them because they're hermaphrodites, but they need to pair up where the male organ is against the female organ and vice versa, and then they fertilize each other. And in many of the parasitic worms, it's the same way. Any questions about that? Other worms are dioecious, and dioecious means that there are separate male and female individuals, and then to reproduce you have to have the male and the female come together. But if they're both living in the intestines, that's pretty easy to do. Okay, any questions about any of that? If there's no questions, let's move on. So let's talk about the cestodes, and the common name for those are tapeworms. Remember that all of the cestodes are parasitic. The tapeworms have a complex life cycle if I said that right. And they have a complex life cycle involving multiple hosts. Most of them, let me think if I can think of any that do not. I can't think of any that do not. Most of them have at least 2 hosts. An intermediate host, why did I lose that? Oh, there it is. Most of the species have an intermediate host where a juvenile form of the tapeworm lives. And then in the juvenile form, you have the parasite invading usually the muscle. And then the juvenile form of the parasite forms a cyst in the muscle. Now, this cyst is different than the parasitic protozoans, which also form a cyst, and you could call it a Schistosomiasis, but I'm not going to use that term. For one thing, it's too hard to say, and I'm just going to call it a cyst. And what's the same with this cyst, which comes from a helminth, and the cyst of a parasitic protozoan is, the cyst is the infective stage for the human. And the cyst is tough and can survive the stomach digestive juices. Any question about that? And that's the same with the cyst of a tapeworm and the cyst of a parasitic protozoan. And then the humans eat the flesh of the intermediate host. In this case, it's a pig, but it could be a cow. And in the muscle, there's the cyst. And if the tissue or the animal isn't cooked well enough or is inappropriately handled, like you can touch the raw pork and pick up the cyst on your hands, and then touch the cooked pork with your hands that are contaminated with the cyst, and then you can put the cyst on the pork, and then somebody eating it can get the pork. Usually, though, it's an undercooked pork, and I don't know of anyone who eats raw pork, but it could be in raw pork as well. And then the human ingests it, and then they get the cyst, which can survive the stomach acid, and then the cyst is in the intestines, which is a favorable environment for the cyst, and then the parasitic worm comes out of the cyst and starts growing in the patient. Now, usually the tapeworms, they have a structure called a Scolex, which will attach to the intestines. And I'll show you the Scolex in just a minute. And then for most of the species we're going to talk about, the human is the definitive host, and that's true for the pork tapeworm and the beef tapeworm. The human is the definitive host, so in a sense they're misnamed, and they're called pork tapeworm because we tend to get that parasite when we eat pork, and the beef tapeworm, we tend to get that parasite when we eat beef, and it has to be undercooked or raw. And anyways, we call it that, but in reality it should be called the human tapeworm, because humans are the definitive host. That is where the worm reaches final maturation and then undergoes sexual reproduction. And then in the fetuses, excuse me, not the fetuses, the feces of the patient who's infected with the tapeworm, they will shed proglottids, and I'll talk about that in a minute, which have the fertilized eggs in them. Any question about any of that? And then those eggs can survive out in the environment. So let's say you have a farmer who goes to the bathroom in the field, and then an animal can eat usually vegetation that are contaminated with the eggs, And then that is how the farm animal, either the pigs or the cow, get the infection from the parasitic worm. Any question about any of that? And then that's the life cycle of the parasitic worm. Oh, I did something wrong here. Well, nope, it's okay. I just opened up another browser for some reason. All right, so let's talk about the two tapeworms that I want to talk about, which are the pork tapeworm and the beef tapeworm. The pork tapeworm does have a scientific name, and it is Taenia solium. The beef tapeworm, its scientific name is Taenia saginata. And they have many similarities. First, when the human becomes infected, the tapeworm comes out of the cyst and it has a scolex already formed. Let me show you a picture of the scolex. So there is the pork tapeworm scolex, and you'll notice it has hooks for attaching to the human tapeworm, to the human intestines, and then it has suckers which can also attach to the intestines. Now in the beef tapeworm, it only has suckers. The beef tapeworm doesn't have the hooks. And that's the scolex, and it's the top of the tapeworm, and it puts out the next segment, which you can't really see it here, but those are a whole bunch of little ones there, and those are proglottids. And when the first one comes out of the scolex, meaning the scolex makes the proglottid, it's very small, and then it grows as you come down the tapeworm, and about halfway, maybe a little less, maybe a little bit more, you have a sexually mature proglottid. And in this tapeworm proglottid, you have, see if I can blow that up any, you have both mature testes, which produce sperm, and mature ovaries, which produce eggs. And you'll notice that there isn't a whole lot more to the proglottid. So most of this worm, all it is doing, meaning the proglottids, is producing eggs. And that's what tapeworms do. They just grow in the human and then produce a bunch of eggs. And that's what tapeworms do. And then as you go down the tapeworm, reaching close to the end, you'll have a tapeworm which was just loaded with fertilized eggs, and that they call a gravid proglottid. Any question about that? Now these end proglottids of the tapeworm break off and are shed in the feces. And when they come out of the feces, meaning the feces come out of the patient, the proglottid itself will rot fairly quickly. But the eggs are hardy and they survive in the environment. And they can survive for many months. I'm not sure how long they can survive, but someplace up to about a year. And in the environment, they're just sitting out in the environment, and then when a cattle or a pig eats vegetation contaminated with an egg, the cattle or the pig will pick up the tapeworm. And then that will grow in the intestine of the animal, and then a juvenile form will emerge from the intestines of either the pig or the tapeworm, and the juvenile form will go into the tissue and then form the cyst. And then a human will become contaminated by eating undercooked or uncooked flesh of the beef or the pork. Any question about any of that? Okay, if there's no questions, let me state that these tapeworms are very long, which you kind of got that feeling here. When we're talking about the beef tapeworm, it can get as long as 6 meters. And each meter, remember, is about 3 feet. 3 feet. Okay? Any question about that? The beef tapeworm is the longest. The pork tapeworm isn't quite as long. All right. I want to talk about a tapeworm which is very different, and it's called Echinococcus granulosus, and it is the tapeworm of the dog. Let me show you a picture of it. See when I can get to it. There it is. And you'll notice that this tapeworm is quite a bit smaller. It does have a scolex. Let me blow up the scolex. These are the suckers, which attaches to the intestine, and those are hooks. What's unique is, let's shrink that again, is that this tapeworm really only has 3 parts. The scolex, a functional proglottid, which is forming the fertilized eggs, meaning this one has the mature testes and ovaries, and they're making eggs and sperm. And then this one, the last proglottid, which is the 3rd part, which has the fully mature fertilized eggs. So that is a gravid proglottid. And you'll notice that this Scolex is making a new proglottid. When this new proglottid is finished, this gravid proglottid will break off and be shed in the feces. And that will keep the tapeworm having 3 segments. 1, 2, 3, meaning 2 proglottids and a Scolex. Any question about that? So that makes this tapeworm very different. Skip it. I can't shut it down. And that is, instead of being up to 6 meters long, which we can find in the beef tapeworm, the dog's tapeworm is only 2 to 8 millimeters long. So it's very different. And the definitive host for Echinococcus granulosus is either the dog or the coyote. And the intermediate species are most animals that eat grass, like cow, sheep, deer. And then humans can be an intermediate for Echinococcus granulosus. Now, when Echinococcus granulosus grows as an intermediate host in the cow, the sheep, the deer, or the human, they will be consumed in the animal's intestine, and then a juvenile form will migrate out of the intestines and into the tissue, such as the liver or the lungs or muscle or brain or any tissue. And then they'll form a hydatid cyst. And this cyst can just keep growing and growing, and it can get as big as the football. And when it grows in a human, it puts tremendous pressure on the normal tissue and can start destroying that normal tissue as it puts more and more pressure on it. Okay? Any question about that? And then when the dog or the coyote eats the cow or the sheep or the deer, and rarely the human, the dog will then become infected with Echinococcus granulosus. And then that will finish the life cycle of the parasite. Any questions about that? All right, so those are the 3 tapeworms want you to know the pork tapeworm, Taenia solium, the beef tapeworm, Taenia saginata, and then the dog tapeworm, Echinococcus granulosus. And humans can be an intermediate for Echinococcus granulosus. Any question about that? If there's no questions, I'm going to move on. All right, so let's talk about the flukes. The scientific name for a fluke is a trematode. Flukes, or trematodes, I'm getting so many of these pages open now, they have a shape for the worm that looks sort of like a leaf. And the worms usually have a mouth and a sucker for attaching to their host species. And then they have a rudimentary intestines, and then a very well developed uterus and ovaries and testes so that they can produce eggs. Once again, most of the parasites, their entire purpose is to produce eggs. Any question about any of that? Let's see if I can close this. Yeah, I can. All right. Let's see. I already talked about that. So the first fluke I want to talk about is Schistosoma, and that is blood flukes. There are 3 species of blood flukes, and they mature and mate in the human blood. They cause a major disease in the world, which is not that common in the United States, but in the world, in third world countries, it's much more common, and the disease is Schistosomiasis. Has anyone ever heard of that? 200 million people per year become infected with Schistosomiasis, which is the disease caused by schistosoma. About 20,000 people die each year in the world from Schistosomiasis. Like I said, this is mostly in third world countries. What happens is the parasite has several life stages in their life cycle, and one of the stages is a swimming parasite that swims through water, and it's really tiny, and it can just burrow directly through the Herman's skin. Usually when someone is swimming in water, but it doesn't have to be swimming. Like, for example, they've discovered that a number of the housewives or the mothers, they'll go down to the river or the lake and then wash their cooking utensils, getting only their hands and maybe the top part of their arms in the water while they're washing the dishes. And some of them have become infected with the blood fluke just from washing the dishes, which, if you think about it, you're not in the water that long when you're washing the dishes. I would say the top would be you're at the place a half an hour, usually less than that, and you don't have your hands in the water all the time. I'm not sure how much, but it's probably less than half of the time. And so they're getting exposed in less than 15 minutes. Okay? Anyways, there's a free-living form of the parasite which swims through the water, and that free-living form can just burrow right through the skin. The only symptom to the patient at this time is that they might have a swimmer's itch, a transient dermatitis at the site where the parasite has burrowed in. The parasite then burrows through the tissue and invades it to get to the circulatory system, which is where the parasite finds its home to reach final maturation, meaning humans are the definitive host. And then the parasite, when it is in the blood, it will mature to its final stage, its final mature stage, and undergo sexual reproduction, creating eggs. And these are fertilized eggs. And then, depending on the species of the fluke, the eggs will either work their way to the lumen of the intestine, or the eggs will work their way to the bladder, or the eggs will work their way to the ureter. And how the eggs get to all of these places is the eggs are shed in the blood of the patient, and then the blood takes the egg to the intestine, or to the bladder, or to the ureter. And like I said, it depends on what species we're talking about, where the eggs go, and then how they're shed to the environment. Obviously, if they go to the intestine, they're shed into the environment in the human feces, and the bladder and the ureters, they're shed into the environment, the eggs, when the patient urinates. Okay? And then when the eggs are shed into the environment, if the eggs get into water, and it doesn't have to be a lot of water, because all they need to do is the eggs get into the water and then swim, change from the egg into a single-celled parasite, and then they swim and infect a freshwater snail. And then the parasite lives in the snail. It's a juvenile form of the parasite. And in the juvenile form of the parasite of the snail, another stage of the parasitic fluke happens, which comes out of the snail and is the free-living form that swims in the water. I guess I shouldn't say free-living because it's parasitic. And it can then burrow into a human, usually children, but anyone swimming in the water, and anyone who's exposed to the water. Like I said, the mothers and housewives can get it just from washing their dishes. Okay? The eggs being in the blood is actually a bad thing. They can lodge, and the eggs can then die in the blood and then lead to blockage and tissue damage. And sometimes it's fatal. Any question about that? So some symptoms of schistosomiasis is the patient becomes lethargic, they get a fever, their stomach swells, and that's from blockage of circulation. The patient feels pain, and then if the blockage is severe, sometimes death can result. And here's a picture of a boy who swam in the water and then later got schistosomiasis, and here we're looking at schistosomiasis happening. Any questions about that? All right. The only other fluke I want you to know is Clenorchis cineanis, and this is the fluke excuse me, that infects the liver and causes liver disease and jaundice. And it's also called the liver fluke because of the organ it hits. And it's endemic in Southeast Asia. And that was the fluke I actually showed you the picture to, the liver fluke. Any questions about flukes? No questions today, okay? So that's all you need to know about Clenorchis. If there's no questions, I want to move to our third and final helminth, which can be parasitic. And I'm only going to talk about parasitic roundworms. Please understand that most roundworms are free-living. There is one parasitic nematode that I'm going to talk about, and it is the most common parasitic worm in the United States. It's Enterobium vermicularis, and it causes the disease that we call pinworm infestation. So the common name for Enterobium vermicularis is the pinworm. And where do I have a picture for that? Someplace I've got a picture for that. There it is. Actually, I think this is the picture of the eggs. Yeah, these are pictures of the eggs. I haven't mentioned, but with many of the parasites, you can diagnose a patient having the worm from its eggs. The pinworm, the adult female pinworm, will come to the perianal region and then deposit her eggs, and you can just take a sticky tape up into the perianal region and put it there and then pull it off and then look at the sticky tape, which is actually what you're seeing here. That stuff in the background is the Scotch tape or transparent tape, and then look at it through the microscope. And the pinworm has eggs shaped like this. And so it's very easy, at least in the case of the pinworm, to test the patient and then look and see if they have pinworms just by putting sticky tape in the perianal region. Any question about that? Let me go to... I'll show you a little video of that, but there we go. A parasitic nematode, Enterobium vermicularis. And as I stated, the female of the species will migrate from the colon or large intestine down through the colon into the perianal region and then deposit the eggs on the outside of the anus. And that movement of the female Enterobium actually gives the patient his or her main symptom, and that is you have perianal itching, and that's from the female moving, as well as possibly from the eggs creating a little bit of inflammation in the region, causing some itching. And the eggs can contaminate bedding and clothes and hands. Because it itches, people who are infected tend to scratch down there, and then they get it in their fingers, on their nails, and then if they touch food, they can deposit the eggs on the food, and then anyone who eats the eggs can get the eggs. And then another thing, you know, children jumping on beds? Apparently, simply from the child jumping on the bed, if the child is infected, that can make the egg airborne, and then other children jumping on the same bed can actually breathe in the egg. Okay? Meaning you don't have to get it directly from direct contact, but most of the time children spread it from they scratch their perianal region because it's itching, they get it on their hands, and then they touch other children, and then the child picks it up on their hands, and then they eat something without washing their hands, and then they get it that way. This is the most common parasitic helminth in the United States, and it's extremely common, or most common, I guess I should say, among young children because they have atrocious health habits and they don't wash their hands before eating, and they'll scratch themselves and then touch other children's hands, and so it spreads very easily among young children, like at daycare centers, and also in, what's the modern term for insane asylums? The mentally challenged institutions, where the patients are mentally challenged and they don't know enough to wash their hands before eating, and you know, you shouldn't scratch yourself down in the perianal region, and so it tends to spread in those places too. Any question about any of that? If not, let's watch a little video. I can get to the website on Interbias vermicularis. Come on. Don't know why my web page is taking so long. Come on, there we go. Come on. For some reason, my computer is locking up. I don't know why. Let's shut some of these browsers down. Ah, here we go.
Here we see a colonoscopy in a 54-year-old patient from Sicily. We just performed polypectomy, and now we see this unexpected guest dancing on the post-polypectomy wound ground. This very vivid white, small and delicate worm is an Enterobius vermicularis, or so-called pinworm. It is the most common intestinal parasite in the Western world and establishes itself mainly in the cecum and appendix. Normally, patients with this nematode infection have a high worm burden. Probably the worm burden in this patient was significantly reduced by the previous bowel preparation.
Okay, any questions? You'll notice that the pinworm,
A parasite in the Western world and establishes itself mainly.
the pinworm really moves around quite a bit. And that's why when it's moving, the female moving to lay her eggs, why they're itchy. All right, any questions?
Did the pinworm cause the color? Did the pinworm cause the color to change?
That patient was receiving treatment for something. I didn't catch what it was, and so that's why the color there is a little off. The nematode is white, if that's your question. The colon is normally brown from all the fecal matter in there, but they had like a colonoscopy, or they cleared it out, and that's why you were able to see the pink of the, I think that was the colon. So did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay,
There was just like a blackish spot around the worm.
Yeah, I would say that's probably from the treatment that the patient was undergoing, because the worm isn't black and the colon isn't black either. Let me see if I can go there again. I don't know why this is taking so long. Let's shut some things down. Boy, that's really long. See, that took about 10 seconds for that to show up once I pasted it in there. See, that patient has a problem on their colon. That shouldn't be normal. Yeah, that blackening there, I think that's from the treatment of the that the patient underwent, or that could be a little bit of fecal matter. So you're talking about this blackening here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's either a little bit of fecal matter or something from the treatment that this patient had. And I would assume that this over here is why the patient was undergoing procedure, because that doesn't look normal. Okay? And I'm only showing you this to show you the worm. Okay? Are there any questions? If not, I'm done covering the parasites. Maybe I'll ask you guys. At 2:30, do you want me to do the review? Because I promised on the syllabus that I will give you a review. Or do you want the review on Tuesday? Excuse me, not Tuesday, Monday. So what do you guys think?
Review on Monday.
Yeah, I'd rather it be Monday too.
Okay. All right. So we'll have the review on Monday. So in the lab, all I'm going to do at 2:30 is open it up to questions, because we don't have a lab. You guys are supposed to be working on your unknown project. Okay?
Do we have a quiz this week?
No, there's no quiz this week.
Awesome.
Okay? All right. So get your unknown project done if you have it identified. If you don't have it done, remember it has to be done by July 21st. And a few of you waited to the end to start your work on the unknown projects. You have to, when you request a test, that test has to incubate. And so some of you may not have enough time to get all the tests done because you waited to the end. And you'll just have to do what you can get done. All right, if there's no further questions, I'm done.
Can you send the two that I requested? I fixed my email to you.
You made a request?
Yeah, in the notes.
And when was it?
Before class started.
Before class today?
Yeah.
Well, yes. Well, then the test will have to incubate, and you'll get your results after the incubation.
Okay.
Okay? All right.
Thanks.